Hi, this is Mashnu, and here is a second video about the Pirc defense, of actually how to play against the Pirc defense. I want to show you another quite aggressive system against the Pirc. If you are a Pirc player with black, then you should prepare for this kind of systems, like the Austrian attack that I showed you in the previous video. Now this time I want to show you a game in which white plays the system bishop to e3 followed by f3 and g4. It's a very aggressive system. White wants to go for his opponent's throat immediately by attacking on the king side. Let's have a look at the game. The move order is a bit different, but it doesn't really matter. Actually, white opened with d4, but after d6, e4, knight f6, we get the same position as when white opens with e4. So knight to c3, g6, and now bishop to e3. This move is not only meant to place the queen on d2 and then with the idea of bishop h6, it's actually also meant to prevent the move c5 by black. So black cannot undermine this white center immediately. In the game, black played c6. Oh, by the way, the players in this game are with white British Grandmaster Glenn Fleer against the German player Christian Bauer. It was played in the tournament of Capelle-Lagrande in 1994 in the 8th round. Well, c6, and now white continues with f3. The idea of f3 is to support the advance of the g-pawn, and this knight is not going to f3 later. It can either find its way to g3 or in some games immediately to h3 and g5 or f4. Of course, if white wants to play on the king side, black must do something either in the center or on the queen side. Black played b5 here. g4 now by white, bishop to g7, queen to d2, with the idea of course of playing bishop to h6 to weaken the dark squares, as we see in many of these systems against the Pirc defense. Now to prevent this, black plays h5 here. g5 was the answer of white. Here, by the way, white must make a choice either to advance the pawn to g5. That's the most played move. It's also, according to the results, the best move in this position for white, to advance the pawn to g5. Another idea is to take on h5. It has also been tried a few times. G takes h5, then knight takes h5 follows. White wants to get rid of this knight here on h5 because it's actually blocking the h-file. So the continuation is knight g to e2. The idea to bring this knight to g3 to trade it for this knight on h5. Knight to d7, rook g1, queen to c7, knight g3. This is how the variation continues. But let's not get lost in sidelines. Let's have a look at the game that has very important things. g5 here played by white. Now the knight goes to d7. So as we see with g5, white gains control, gains actually space on the king side, and it looks at first sight as if this pawn is blocking this battery of bishop and queen. But the idea of white is to later continue with f4 and f5 and rip open this pawn structure of black on the king side. Anyway, rook to d1 now, giving extra support to this d4 pawn. Bishop to b7, bishop to g2, knight to b6, b3, taking away the c4 square, prophylactic move. As you know, in chess it's not only about making the best plan for yourself, it's also about preventing counterplay, preventing the opponent's plan. So here black wants to play knight to c4 and white prevents this with b3. Now knight b8 to d7, knight to h3, queen c7, castle kingside, and now that the black king is on g8, white starts his attack with f4. The idea is clear: to advance to f5. b4 now played by black. Black tries to keep white busy on the queen side. The knight goes to e2, and now c5, continuing to advance these pawns. In some games with this type of variations against the Pirc, we see that white castles queenside. Well, here actually it would give black attacking chances if white would have castled queenside. So the king on g1 is actually much safer now than it would be on c1 or b1, if we consider that these pawns can advance and that black has brought all these pieces to the queenside. Now d5 followed, so white is closing the center and then preparing to attack on the king side with f5. At this point, black tried something that didn't work. He moved the f pawn to f5, and this is a mistake. Later we will see a possible alternative, but let me show you the game first. G takes f6, e takes f6, and now rook to f3. The weakness is g6, so that's why this rook is going to g3 to later advance the pawn to f5. That's the idea. Rook to f7, rook g3, knight to f8, and f5 now. Black plays now rook to e8, and this must have been a very difficult decision for black. I'm sure that many of you think now, how about g5 to keep the position closed? It is a very logical idea and perhaps a very good playable move, g5 here. Here white has a very tactical idea of sacrificing a piece to continue his attack. It's with the move knight h to f4. The threat is to not only to take here, but also to enter on e6 with the knight. So let's say that black is almost forced to take this sacrifice. G takes f4, and then the other knight comes in, knight takes f4, again with this same idea of either taking on h5 or entering on e6. If black plays now h4, then the rook goes to g4. The same position stays as it is with the same threat. Let's say that black wants to block this G file, for example with the maneuver knight to h7, knight to g5. Then by moving the knight to h7, he gives away control over e6, so the knight e6 is a dangerous idea. If queen to e7, then rook takes h4, and perhaps you already see things coming like queen to e2, queen to h5, threatening a mate on h7. So this is quite promising for white. It's a sacrifice that is based on the fact that there are two light pieces here of black and a rook that are not participating in the defense. So the attacking pieces are well coordinated. It's easy to also involve the queen in the attack, and that gives white attacking chances. Well, this is only about this g5 idea. In the game, rook to e8 was played, and white continued with knight e to f4. Taking on g6 would also have been a good idea to take on here on g6, I mean. But in the game, knight to f4 was played. Now h4 attacks the rook, rook goes to g4, rook goes to e5 now, and white takes on g6. Let's have a short look in this position about g5. That is also a very logical defense. Well, in that case, white can continue with knight to e6. This knight is a monster there. and if this knight is traded, then we get a very strong pawn here on e6. This is really very difficult for black to continue. Also d6 is undefended, so queen takes d6 now. It leads, well, perhaps not to a kingside attack, but to a warm position in the center. So let's return. g5 was not really an option for that reason. Now rook to e5 was played. Knight takes g6, knight takes g6, rook takes g6. Now queen to e7, bringing the queen to the e file, rook to e1, preparing a discovered attack on the e file later, because here the threat of white is to play bishop to f4, attacking the rook, and the rook has nowhere to go. So black decided to give the exchange here by taking on e4, but it's not really a solution. After knight to f2, rook goes back, and then knight to g4, the rook has nowhere to go actually, because moving the rook by taking, for example, on f5 is, of course, well, we have this. We also have some discovered moves with bishop takes c5 attacking the queen, so this is really not very useful. Knight to g4, knight takes d5 was played. Now white takes the rook and queen takes, and now this discovered move. Bishop to h6 attacking the queen on e5, the queen takes on f5, and now bishop to e4 attacks the queen, defends also the rook on g6. So things get really difficult now for black. Queen goes to e5, queen to g2, bringing more pieces and increasing the pressure against g7. Black gave a check here on d4, king goes to h1, now f5, and bishop takes g7. The queen is under attack. There is no other option than to take this bishop. Rook takes, and now rook takes g7. Here black resigned, because if black takes the rook on g7, then white doesn't take on g7. He first takes on d5 with check. So queen takes here, bishop takes here with check, and white is a rook up here. So then it's completely over. Now it would be unfair to say that that this is a totally winning system for white, because, as I said before, black made a defensive mistake by playing f5. Let's go back to that moment. It's in this position. So the last move of white was d5, and here is where black played f5, actually weakening his own pawn structure voluntarily. And a better idea would be here to continue on the queen side with a5. If white continues with f5, we get an interesting position, because after f5, on one hand white is attacking, but on the other hand is also giving away this square e5. So knight e5 is possible here. Then the knight from h3 can go to f4, and an important defensive move here for black is bishop to c8. This bishop on c8 is actually ready to be activated. Let's say that white plays f takes g6, f takes g6 by black, and now already this bishop is controlling this g4 square, so it's much more active than where it was before on b7. If, for example, white now wants to trade his knight for this strong knight on e5 by playing knight to d3, then bishop to g4 is already a strong move, pinning the knight on e2. If knight takes e5 now, then bishop takes e5, and black has two active bishops. So I would say this position is equal. Both sides have chances here to continue their own plans. So that's about this mistake that black did at this point by playing f5, actually giving white very easy target on g6. It's quite easy to continue this this strategy of attacking the weakest point of black. Now I hope that you found this interesting, and for the Pirc players, perhaps this is a good warning to prepare yourself against this type of systems, like the Austrian attack and this f3 and g4 variation. Alright, thanks for watching, leave your comments on YouTube, and I'll see you next time. Goodbye.